I feel satisfied. I don't feel like I've ever embarrassed myself or my people, you know, in nothing that I've done. And yet and all, I got the whole world fearing me, you know what I'm saying, at 23.
Shakur is alive, not just in spirit or myth, but as a man who pulled off one of the most audacious moves in history nearly 30 years ago. He faked his death, and the truth is finally coming to light. No, this isn't from some fringe YouTube theory or wild Reddit post. This comes from the very network of insiders who helped pull it off in the first place. These insiders, once loyal to keeping the secret, are now blowing the lid off the whole operation. What was once whispered about in shadows has now been confirmed. And the names behind this massive cover-up, they're coming out of hiding one by one. One of the biggest names, according to multiple sources close to Death Row's original circle, is Calvin Broadus, better known to the world as Snoop Dogg.
Snoop Dogg saying he owns Death Row is no different than me saying Tupac was alive because I had the unreleased Tupac music.
This isn't some rehash of old conspiracy theories. No, what we're witnessing is the unraveling of one of the most carefully orchestrated deceptions in entertainment history. The kind of operation so smooth, it makes Hollywood plots look like amateur hour. We've got timelines, witness statements, and even travel records that trace Shakur's escape from Las Vegas to the Caribbean. Forget the chaos they made you believe happened on the Strip in September 1996. This was a calculated operation, executed with military precision. If Tupac's disappearance was planned, someone had the money, the power, and the silence to keep it hidden for almost 3 decades. To understand why this is sending shockwaves through the hip-hop world, we need to rewind to that night in Las Vegas, September 7th, 1996. The Tyson fight had just wrapped up at the MGM Grand. Shakur, riding high on fame, left the arena with Suge Knight. Instead of a typical night out, at 11:15 p.m., a white Cadillac pulled up alongside their BMW and unloaded 14 rounds. 4 of those bullets found Shakur. A fragment grazed Suge Knight. The world was told that Shakur died from his injuries 6 days later at the University Medical Center. But even back then, things didn't add up.
Humans are not just good and bad, black and white. They're compassionate at times. They're at times. A man can be and compassionate to women at the same time. I was. Look at the lunatic and look at Brenda's Got a Baby.
For starters, there were no eyewitnesses on a busy Saturday night. Not a single person saw anything. And Shakur, who never went anywhere without his bulletproof vest, wasn't wearing it that night. Oh, and the surveillance cameras along the Strip, they just happened to malfunction at the perfect time. Sounds fishy, right? Then there's the autopsy report. They listed Shakur at 6 feet tall, weighing 215 pounds, while every official record, from his label to his driver's license, said he was 5 feet 10 inches and about 168 pounds. The body was cremated within 24 hours by a mortician who disappeared right after and has never been seen again. The hospital records, they mysteriously vanished by the following spring. Convenient, huh? But here's the kicker. In the liner notes of his posthumous album, The Don Killuminati, the 7-Day Theory released under the name Machiavelli, Shakur had already written his exit Shakur, enter Machiavelli. Years later, a former Black Panther security operative named Michael Nice came forward claiming he helped orchestrate the whole extraction. He described a small jet leaving Nevada under the cover of night, making a stop in Barbados before delivering Shakur safely to Cuba, where his aunt, Assata Shakur, had been living since the 80s. Nice claimed his firm paid off hospital officials to swap bodies and falsify documents.
The music industry, it's a dirty game. It's a dirty game. Anyway, you know what I mean? It's a dirty game, so much stuff that, you may never hear about, but it's a dirty game.
He insisted this wasn't some random stunt, but a calculated move in response to credible threats on Shakur's life. Then, just when he said he was ready to reveal everything, his niece was found dead in her London flat in 2018. No autopsy, no cause given, nothing after that. Multiple investigators have tried to piece it all together. Photos and videos from Old Havana show a man in his 40s who looks strikingly like Shakur. Same jawline, same tattoos, even the left-hand ring scar visible under close inspection. Locals interviewed in 2018 and again in 2022 swore they'd seen him hanging around small cafes and bookshops. A private investigator named Jimmy Poole even posted photos from Belize, claiming that Shakur had relocated there after years in Cuba. In every new piece of footage, the man doesn't speak, but the resemblance, it's uncanny. And now, with fresh testimony coming from the Keith D trial in Las Vegas, set to begin in the summer of 2024, the panic among hip-hop's old guard is real. Keith D, a former Compton gang affiliate, has already admitted he was in the car that fired those shots, but he's still refusing to name the gunman. What's even stranger is that prosecutors aren't pushing for the death penalty. An odd move. For insiders, that detail speaks volumes. It suggests they're trying to keep the story from spilling outside the lines.
I just get right on the side of his head and just start talking to him in his ear. Just talking to him.
For months now, Snoop Dogg has been dodging public appearances, pulling out of interviews, and flat out refusing to address Suge Knight's explosive new accusations. Knight, still speaking from prison through his infamous Collect Call podcast, has gone on the offensive. Openly questioning Snoop's involvement in the events of that fateful night, he claims Snoop warned Daz Dillinger not to come to Las Vegas, saying, "Something's gonna happen."
I'm quite sure everything, I am death row. Suge Knight is death row. So I'm quite sure, before it's said and done, all eyes on me and Machiavelli out of pockets. I'm definitely to come back to me.
But Knight isn't just speculating. He's asking why Snoop had a communication radio connected to Death Row's security. If he was allegedly in Los Angeles during the shooting, his words aren't casual. They're accusatory. And given his closeness to the scene, they carry some serious weight. Snoop's behavior in early 2025 only fueled more suspicion. He was expected to show up at the anniversary celebration of Death Row's founding, but at the last minute, he pulled out with no explanation. His social media presence, once buzzing daily, has practically disappeared. The posts that used to come from him directly are now replaced with generic corporate statements managed by staff. People who've worked closely with him for years say he's acting like someone waiting for the other shoe to drop. And that fear isn't exactly unwarranted if it's proven that Shakur survived. Those who were involved in covering it up could be facing charges, obstruction, fraud, or even worse. But here's where it gets even more suspicious. Financial records show that after Snoop acquired Death Row in 2022, he started shifting trademarks and publishing rights through shell companies in Belize and Panama. Exactly the same jurisdictions linked to the alleged extraction operation back in 1996. To investigators, it looks like business as usual.
Nah, nigga, what's happening?
I own Death Row, so I do what the fuck I want to do.
But to those paying attention, it seems like a quiet attempt to erase any trace of who financed Shakur's disappearance. And then there's Suge Knight's latest bombshell dropped during his cell phone interviews. He's making it clear. Snoop Dogg has a lot of explaining to do. Knight points out that Shakur personally vouched for Snoop at a time when Death Row was falling apart, but he also makes a striking accusation. Snoop never visited Shakur in the hospital. If the official story were true, that should have been a simple act of loyalty. But Snoop's story? He claimed he fainted when he saw Shakur and that Afeni Shakur had to walk him through it. Suge Knight isn't buying it. He says that scene is a straight-up fabrication, one meant to paint Snoop as a grieving brother, all while keeping him at arm's length from the truth of what actually went down.
He said it was, according to him now, he said it was security that accepted money, participated in it, and it was so-called homies.
Meanwhile, former members of the Outlaws Collective are speaking out. Napoleon, one of Shakur's closest allies, has accused Snoop of rewriting history, acting like he was there for Shakur, while subtly diminishing his legacy in interviews. Napoleon suggests that jealousy played a part in all this. Back in the day, Snoop was the label's star until Shakur came along. When Shakur's popularity skyrocketed, Snoop's hold on Death Row began to fade fast. Napoleon recently said, maybe Snoop couldn't say it to Shakur's face, but he's been saying it ever since. If we pull all these threads together, the body switch, the sudden wealth transfers, the silence, the emerging witnesses, a clear picture starts to form. Shakur's disappearance wasn't some chaotic event. It was a plan crafted by artists, executives, and financiers who all had something to gain by keeping him out of the public eye. But now, with the Keith D case reopening old files and Cuban officials quietly cooperating with new international investigations, those protective layers are beginning to crumble fast, and Snoop knows it. His ownership of Death Row, once seen as a triumphant moment, now looks more like a move to cover up the past. Suge Knight has hinted that the transfer of ownership itself might not be legitimate, demanding paperwork that no one has been able to produce. Meanwhile, forensic analysts who've been combing through the old MGM surveillance footage claim they've spotted discrepancies in the timestamp, suggesting some parts of the footage were edited before being released. A discovery that could shatter the entire official narrative. If those tapes were tampered with, then someone at the top was definitely in on it. Suddenly, the stakes are much higher. What started as an urban legend has evolved into a full-blown chain reaction, pulling in every last person connected to the old death row empire. The closer authorities get to the truth, the more panicked the response becomes. Vanishing interviews, sealed archives, and a sudden rush of legal consultations from people who haven't uttered Shakur's name in years. But the real question hanging over all of this is the one no one at death row, old or new, wants to answer. For decades, we've been told Shakur died in a drive-by, but what if the so-called tragedy wasn't the real act?
That's why you get these type of individuals always kicking dirt on Pac name after they made their millions from doing these documentaries and stuff.
What if the disappearance itself was the true plot? And what if the person the world believed was Shakur's most loyal friend was actually in on the plan to make sure he never returned? The storm that followed Shakur's disappearance has been louder than anything Death Row ever released. When Snoop Dogg announced in February 2022 that he had bought the iconic label, the media hailed it as a victory lap. But the timing raised eyebrows. He called it a meaningful moment, a chance to own his legacy. But when you match that with the new wave of Shakur sightings popping up everywhere, it starts to feel less like coincidence and more like careful coordination. Death Row wasn't just a record label, it was the evidence vault. Every contract, every studio reel, every handwritten lyric was a direct link to the night Shakur vanished. And if those archives contained proof that his disappearance was planned from the start, then whoever owned them controlled the story. Snoop didn't just buy a brand, he might have bought silence. Almost instantly, Suge Knight fired back from his prison phone, blasting Snoop on his podcast. He wasn't playing around. Show me the paperwork, show me what you really own. It wasn't just a casual jab. Suge hinted that Snoop had taken over Death Row through a front deal, using intermediaries to hide the true source of the money. The implications were chilling. The purchase wasn't a victory, it was damage control.
He said it was, according to him, he said it was security that accepted money, participated in it, and it was so-called homies.
Snoop hadn't inherited just a legendary brand. He'd inherited a ticking time bomb. And if Shakur's real story ever came to light, that time bomb could turn into an indictment. We can trace the money trail. Back in 1995, Snoop helped secure Shakur's $1.4 million bail from a New York prison at the time. It seemed like just brotherly support between label mates. But insiders now claim that the bail wasn't a gift, it was leverage. Whoever freed Shakur essentially gained full creative and contractual control over him. His albums from that moment on flowed through Death Row's accounts, with hidden clauses ensuring profits, even after his supposed death. Fast forward to 2022, when Snoop rushes to take back control of Death Row, just as new rumors of Shakur's survival start bubbling up. It almost feels like he needed to seize control before the old receipts started resurfacing. The fallout, immediate. Snoop's highly anticipated Back on Death Row album dropped that same week, adding more fuel to the fire. Critics called Snoop's Back on Death Row album nostalgic but hollow. Its sales barely scraped past expectations. Then from behind bars, Suge Knight dropped his most brutal line yet. "You disappointed the world too many." It sounded like bitterness, sure, but to those who understood the coded language of that inner circle, it was a warning. Suge was reminding Snoop that his fame was built on a secret so explosive it could bring everything crashing down. Meanwhile, the Keith D case, the one prosecutors promised would finally close the book on Shakur's death, only grew stranger with each passing month. A 60-year-old man terminally ill who had once bragged about his involvement was suddenly facing trial with no threat of the ultimate penalty. No death sentence, no life term, just a quiet deal. But here's the kicker. Prosecutors kept Suge Knight off the witness list. Why silence the man who was in the car with Shakur that night? Because his version of events might expose the full extent of the plan, the fake hospital records, the decoy ambulance, the pilot waiting on the runway. Someone doesn't want that story reaching open court. The deeper we dig, the clearer the pattern becomes. Every time new evidence about Shakur's survival leaks, something pulls the headlines in another direction. A new Snoop venture, a retro album drop, or a public shift in focus. It's like the industry cranks up the volume to drown out the truth. And we've heard from 3 separate sources, 2 former death row engineers and 1 label accountant who claim that certain master tapes from the MVE sessions were removed from the vault just days before Snoop's purchase. These tapes were rumored to contain voice notes and studio chatter recorded after Shakur's supposed death. But guess what? None of those reels have ever been seen again. What makes this story even more explosive is how Snoop's own timeline directly intersects with the night of the Vegas incident. Back in the 2010s, Suge Knight claimed that Snoop told Daz Dillinger not to travel to Las Vegas, warning, something's gonna happen. That chilling phrase has haunted interviews ever since. Warren G later confirmed Snoop was in LA that night, but somehow he was getting real-time updates through a radio device linked to the Death Row security channel. How could he be listening live unless he had a direct line to someone on the scene? No one has ever fully explained this, and the question remains unanswered. Then there's the glaring contradiction in Snoop's public statements. He once claimed he visited Shakur in the hospital, saying he fainted at the sight of Shakur hooked up to tubes. But hospital insiders insist no celebrity visitors were logged under his name, and security footage from that wing, it's still sealed tight.
I say a week before we was best of friends. 2 days before he died, I don't think he liked me.
Was Snoop's story a sentimental recollection or a carefully crafted cover-up to make him appear helpless rather than complicit? The jealousy angle continues to come up as well. Outlaws member Napoleon has repeatedly said Snoop never liked sharing the spotlight. Once Shakur arrived, he saw it as a threat. Napoleon bluntly put it in a 2023 interview. Shakur came in and took all his shine. That bitterness might explain why, just days before Shakur's disappearance, Snoop went on a New York radio show and praised Biggie and Puff Daddy, words that sent shockwaves through the death row camp and left Shakur feeling completely betrayed. Within hours, their final rift had torn them apart. Over the years, Snoop has reshaped the narrative, positioning himself as the peacemaker, the survivor who rose above the East Coast, West Coast chaos. But did he have more to gain than he's led on? But when we dig into the public record, the timing of his interviews, the sudden shift in tone, the calculated distancing, it starts to feel more like someone trying to rewrite history before the witnesses start talking. Suge Knight's podcast has already suggested that some key communications from 1996 were preserved by law enforcement. If those Nextel transcripts ever see the light of day, they could reveal who was pulling the strings from behind the scenes that night. And here comes the real plot twist, the business empire that sprang up from Shakur's absence. 7 posthumous albums, millions of dollars in revenue, and global merchandising. Each release depended on the public believing Shakur was gone for good. But what happens if that illusion shatters? If it does, everyone involved in the release of those albums, from producers to distribution execs, could find themselves facing fraud charges, and Snoop, as the current face of Death Row, stands right at the top of that chain. Suge Knight has already framed it bluntly. The man who owns the label also owns its secrets. He's questioned whether Snoop's so-called purchase was even legal, demanding to see the paperwork and claiming the real rights are still elsewhere. His message couldn't be clearer. Snoop isn't preserving Death Row, he's burying it. Every time Knight calls in from prison, his tone grows sharper, hinting that he's holding back evidence for the right moment. He may have lost the empire, but he hasn't lost the truth. And now with the Keith D trial set to begin in June, Suge Knight has made it clear he plans to speak, whether the court allows him or not. Prosecutors can delay, redact, and restrict all they want, but they can't stop Suge's voice from reaching the public. And if Knight releases the recordings he claims to have, they could connect financial transactions, travel manifests, and coded communications back to one central network, the same one that hid Shakur and kept the profits rolling in. We can already feel the tension tightening across the industry. Publicists are advising silence, archives are being digitally reorganized, and certain high-profile figures have suddenly disappeared off the grid. Insiders are calling it the calm before the storm. Every detail that leaks, from the missing autopsy files to the resurfacing photos of Shakur in Havana, chips away at the official narrative.
I think that Dr. Dre was the perfect father figure, role model, mentor, and producer for me at the time because I was young, I was raw.
The closer we get to the courtroom, the more fragile the myth becomes. And that leads to the most unsettling question of all. If Shakur really is alive, if he's been watching this circus unfold from some far-off place outside of Los Angeles, what happens when he finally decides to speak? Will he expose the names of those who helped him stage his disappearance, or the ones who cashed in on it? And what about the accusations from Suge Knight? Will Shakur confirm them, or will he reveal an even darker force pulling the strings behind the scenes? Keith D's trial starts in June. Suge Knight is still broadcasting from his prison cell, and somewhere, Shakur is listening. The real question isn't what Snoop Dogg did back then, it's what he's preparing for now. Because when the truth finally comes to light, it won't just rewrite music history. It will determine who walks free and who finally has to face the consequences of their own secrets. What do you think? Will Shakur stay silent, or is the world about to hear from the man who was never really gone? Until next time, keep your eyes wide open and your mind sharper than ever.